So for our last session of the term, we're going to be in the studio, and Hope is going to be modelling again, as she did last week at Prestonfield House Hotel, where we were working with watercolour. And I thought a good connection would be to get you to paint in oil, an oil sketch, but using what I'm calling a Renoir method. So I suppose you could sum it up actually as an approach to oil painting where you don't use any outlines. And we worked with watercolour, first in pencil, then with painted shapes. This approach I've broken down into 3 steps. First, thin washes of dilute colour, so colourful shapes reflecting your subject. Then secondly, add mid and dark tones with slightly less dilute paint, something that's a bit more opaque and creates a certain solidity. And then thirdly, I'm going to demonstrate applying much thicker paint in places for the lighter and brighter colours. I'm going to work from this photograph of Hope at a previous occasion that we went to Prestonfield House Hotel. I think I'm going to put her in a yellow dress though, because there's quite a lot of grey in this image. So I'm working on a white canvas, as Renoir would have done. As I said, I'm going to put Hope in a yellow dress. So I think I'll start with the yellow dress. This is a bit of yellow ochre, which I've diluted with some of the medium. And this paint, since it's diluted, it'll run a bit, but you can see that I'm just putting down some shapes. I might catch some of these drips, which I don't want to go too far. And I'm now putting down something for the seat. So you'll see this is dilute paint put on with a fairly broad brush. And so these shapes will inevitably be loose. There'll be some mixing where these different colours meet each other, and that will soften those edges. There'll also be a slightly more luminous quality to these colours because they're being painted straight onto white. So I'm working my way through these colours, using a relatively broad brush, and knowing that these shapes that I begin with will be refined. But I think you can see this sort of mixing of the edges in particular adds a certain quality, a certain amount of form to the subject already. And that's something that I'm going to build on. I also have a rag with which I could change some of these shapes. I could certainly thin them out. If she's looking a little bit too dark in places, I could wipe off, but actually I'm not going to, because I think that will work nicely for me to apply thicker paint to. I think this can be a really interesting experience of oil paint, because essentially what I'm doing is working with translucent paint first, which has a certain colour to it, a luminous colour in places, and then adding to that with more opaque paint in order to either to darken, as I've said, that will be my next step, will be to darken some of the mid and dark tones. And then lastly, I'll have to find enough vibrancy in the third layer of paint, enough vibrancy in order to make those colours stand out from these washes. And one of the consequences of that, attempting to match the vibrancy of the washes with opaque, thicker colour, is that the overall degree of colour in the painting will be much higher, or to put it differently, the painting will be more colourful. And that's a real feature of Renoir's work, the vibrancy and strength of colour that he worked with. So that's more or less my first stage. I've got everything covered. There's a bit of running, which I think's okay, but I could manage it if I wanted to. But now I'm going to start to darken some of these colours by using mixtures related, there's similar sort of mixtures to these dilute ones, but not quite so runny. This is when looking with your eyes half closed comes into its own. And I'm just looking for some of the shadow shapes, maybe, and it's defining one part of the painting with another. So if I put in a bit of the wall behind the seat, then that starts to make the seat stand out. And now I'll do something to the seat to begin to help the figure stand out. Some of that's still a bit thin, so I probably should mix a bit more. At this early stage, I'm still, as I would normally, working with a few sort of bigger shapes. I may well come back to some of these parts to add more detail, or to continue to refine. So this next stage of blocking in the dark and the midtones isn't necessarily complete in itself. And I'm making these changes, adding this mid-tone and darker tone pattern. I'm continuing to add it with a big brush, a relatively broad brush, so that I am keeping things, I'm unifying things and keeping the simplification going. And it strikes me actually that, working in this way, it's said Renoir was an instinctive painter, and this is absolutely an instinctive process, because I've got to react to the colours. The new colours that I put on are going to be influenced by what's there already. So yes, it's a process guided by what's happening in the painting. I'll just spread out some of that darker yellow. And I also am making sure I leave gaps. I don't want everything to be too solid. That's her dress, and then I'm going to darken her hair. So as I would often do, if I were painting with a different approach, I've worked my way towards the figure. There's probably more I could do to the background in that respect. And then working my way towards the face and hands. I'm going to do a little bit of darkening of the arms and the I did something to the neck, maybe even some features. And then I'll do a little bit to those plants behind her. So this stage of darkening, adding mid and darker tones, it's not unlike what I was doing with the watercolor mixtures. In order to darken some of the watercolor colors, for example, a green, I would add a little bit of the opposite red to neutralize it. And so some of these colors that I began with their sort of luminous effect, I'm now knocking back a little bit, neutralizing with some of their opposite complementary colors. So for what's effectively the third stage, adding lighter and brighter colors, there are probably two important things to suggest. The first is that I need to mix enough paint so that I can sit some of this color on the surface and make it stand out. And it'll need to stand out with some intensity against the thin colors that I put down first. So when I mix a color, this isn't coming out very well on the screen, but if I hold it up against my painting, I can see if it's bright enough, light enough, and bright enough. And then I'm starting here just with some of these sort of more luminous bits of leaf behind her. I'm applying that in a more substantial way so that it sits on the surface. Here's a lighter, brighter yellow. I think that might be what's needed. And then I'll work with the dress and the face. So there is, as I've said, a kind of instinctive part to this, which is looking for the brighter versions of colors that will really stand out. And working with these lighter and brighter colors, I'll also be adding white to those mixtures. That's going to be necessary to make these colors lighter and in some cases more opaque. But I'm still leaving gaps so that the original more luminous color can be seen through. I'm going to put a little bit of light on top of her hair. And I'll try a little bit of light on the face and hands. I've tried to do this fairly quickly and advance the steps, but any of these things that I've been doing, I can go back over and adjust and would do. So I'm now putting a little bit more warmth in parts of the face and hands. Something slightly more opaque. It's probably as colourful as a lot of what is already there, but it's, as I say, a bit more opaque. So the opacity will give a certain amount of solidity. And now I've got an even lighter mixture. And I'm hoping to connect these lights. And because there are bits of white canvas showing through, as I've said, there's sort of imperative to get these brighter colours standing out. I'll try a bit on the face, maybe. I really would like to do something to the seat that she's on. and the wall behind her. So a quick adjustment to the hair to work with the negative shape of the face. A little bit more definition with a small brush. And then I will do something to the seat, and then probably that's where this demonstration will finish. So it's been a Renoir style method. Thin dilute paint to start, painting loose shapes, letting some of the white canvas, or at least the thin paint, show through. Then working on mid-tones and darker tones, creating a more solid effect. And then finally adding much more substantial pre-mixed colours of a luminous, or of a brighter quality, to match the more luminous thin paint which went down first. Okay, so we'll be able to work on that in the studio on Monday. Cheerio.